Well, I woke up to an explosive report in the Globe and Mail this morning, reporting that CSIS documents viewed by the newspaper reveal China's strategy to influence the 2021 election. Beijing wanted the Liberals to be elected, but only to a minority mandate. And according to the documents, China viewed the Conservatives as too harsh on China and used disinformation campaigns against them.
We have, like I said, known for a long time that China and others engage in foreign interference in Canada, including during our elections.
Justin Trudeau knew about this interference, and he covered it up because he benefited from it. He is perfectly happy to let a foreign authoritarian government interfere in our elections as long as they're helping him.
The Globe and Mail's Stephen Chase and Bob Fife broke this story, and Stephen Chase joins me now live in the studio. So Stephen, great story, bombshell story today. Tell us broadly what you uncovered here.
What we've uncovered is evidence that the Chinese state, the Chinese government, wanted to affect the outcome of the 2021 election. They wanted the Liberals to win. They did not want the Conservatives to win. They were very unhappy at Conservative policies on China, particularly a bid or a proposal to create a foreign registry, which would keep track of influence. And so they set about trying to make sure to defeat candidates, Conservative candidates they thought were unfriendly to Beijing, and to help the Liberals. And so we have seen many reports detailing how they did this. We have a report where the former Consul General in Vancouver for China bragged about defeating MPs, and she talked about the methods they used. And we have other reports that detail the sort of lines that they were feeding. And what really is interesting in this report is the degree to which the Chinese state likes to prey on new Canadians.
Right.
We need to be clear here. This is not about people in Canada acting willingly or being puppets. They are bullied and cajoled and manipulated into adopting Beijing's line. And so that's a lot of what we're talking about here.
So the person in the consulate, this means diplomatic staff. People here with diplomatic status are acting as election meddlers, according to what you've seen.
That's correct, yes. And not only in the Vancouver consulate, but also in the Toronto consulate. In fact, those are the two most important consulates in terms of influence management.
So there's attempting to influence an election, and then there's actually influencing the outcome, whether at individual riding or at the top line level. Is there evidence that this had an impact on the final election results?
What we have is we have them bragging about having an impact.
Right.
Obviously, we can look at the polls. We've seen, as you know, there was a dramatic drop in a number of ridings that the Conservatives had previously held, ridings where there's a Chinese-Canadian diaspora. You know, for instance, there was a series of MPs who were incumbents who lost their seats, Bob Soroya, Alice Wong, Kenny Chiu. And so we have, for instance, the evidence that the Chinese consulate in Vancouver believes it's responsible for the two particular losses in Vancouver.
Right, and these are key battleground areas, right? Like this would be in the GTA, in the Greater Toronto Area, the lower mainland of British Columbia. These are critical areas for elections. So it was a focus strategy and seems to have a very highly specific and sophisticated intention to deliver a Liberal minority government.
Yes, they in fact wanted a minority government because in another report they prefer it when there's a minority government because the government would be prevented in taking additional measures that might be contrary to Beijing's interests. One of the things they do here is they have lines and they have messages that they want their proxies to spread. For instance, that the Conservatives, they want to really hammer home comparisons with Trump, and that if the Conservatives got elected, they would restrict university students from coming from China, which would hurt these people's families' fortunes. And so you really see a concerted effort to dream up, to build messages that would plant fear in the hearts of voters, of new Canadian voters.
So we were carrying it live when the Prime Minister spoke today, sensibly to respond to the Rouleau report, but you were there and you asked him about this. What did you make of his response to the findings in your report?
Sure. Yeah, he has a stock phrase he's used for several months now, which is roughly that there may have been meddling, but it didn't change the outcome, meaning we still would have won. And he used that again today. He tried to reassure us that the SITE task force, which is a task force of public servants, that they've safeguarded the election and they've made sure that there's been no meddling that in fact changed outcomes. So he's very much focused on outcomes. He's not really telling us about individual ridings.
Right.
And then he also sort of played down the idea that China could do something like this, and that he said it would be not unseen for a diplomat to take credit for something even if they didn't in fact achieve it.
Right. So, look, I'm not going to ask you who your sources are, but like you do spell this out in your piece that you have viewed documents and spoken to people who risk not only losing their jobs, but criminal prosecution for the information they have shared and shown to you and Bob Fife. What does that tell you, that people are willing to risk such extreme punishment to get this information out?
Well, your colleague at Radio Canada raised that with the Prime Minister as well. What does it say? Is there a malaise there? Is there something wrong in CSIS? Is there a concern they're not being heard? And I think he put it quite well there. Right.
Okay. Stephen Chase, excellent reporting by you and Bob, and thanks for coming in and talking to us about it.
You're welcome.
That's the Globe and Mail's Stephen Chase. Okay, we're going to talk more about this interference with Akshay Singh. He's an international affairs and security scholar who is currently a research associate with Ottawa University Centre for International Policy Studies, and he joins me now from Vancouver. So Akshay, we know about Chinese election interference in 2019, now this new report about China's election meddling in 2021. How concerning is all of this for you?
I think for me, it is concerning that we've got so much detail now about the alleged interference and so few tools to kind of handle it meaningfully. So the interference issue is not unique to Canada. It's certainly an international issue. And I think we're just starting to now understand the breadth of the potential problem here. So I think we should be concerned, and I think we should be having an informed conversation about what we're going to do next.
This was a very specific and very targeted goal, a Liberal minority government. And the way that this campaign unfolded, what do you make of the sophistication at play here?
The sophisticated nature of Chinese influence operation and interference operations is not a surprise to me. If you look at what's going on elsewhere in the world, especially in places like Taiwan, you have seen signs that China is looking to interfere in democratic processes. And Australia has talked about this publicly, as has the United States. So the fact that Canada would be a target of such activities is not surprising to me. The fact that they're picking and choosing people to support is something that's been witnessed elsewhere. It's not, again, unique to Canada. And it's ultimately an exercise in trying to be pragmatic, I think, about achieving specific outcomes. And I think it's important to highlight that it's very difficult to measure outcome. And I heard Stephen talk about this as well. It's very difficult to say such and such actions actually influence the outcome of an election, because we don't necessarily measure before and after outcome elections in terms of how a foreign country can influence it.
But they got this specific goal of, yes, Justin Trudeau, but not a Justin Trudeau majority. So I mean, what do you think their end goal here is? You say specific objectives. What can we conclude that Beijing was after?
I think in this instance, if the reporting is accurate, Beijing was trying to pursue a policy that best serves its interests. So I think the Globe and Mail article talks about how how China benefits from discord in parliament. And that's one of the mentions of why a minority government would be of interest, because not everyone can agree on everything, and there's political discord. So I think China benefits from political discord in democracies, and it benefits from political discord internationally when people don't agree on how to counter China effectively. So in this instance, it sounds like that's what their objective was.
So the Globe and Mail has seen documents that implicates officials in here with diplomatic status. They work in the diplomatic missions. They were implicated in this attempt to meddle in the election. I mean, how should Canada respond to that if people who are here as diplomats are taking these steps?
Well, there are a couple of things that we can do, and we have done in the past. We have PNG'd or persona non grata diplomats that have acted and behaved irresponsibly, clandestinely, not according to their function. We've done that to Russian diplomats, for example, in reaction to several actions they've taken internationally. That's one option. The second option is understanding who's taking these activities that are working with the diplomats and setting up rules like a foreign agent registry or other kinds of modernization to our existing legislation to penalize those people and not incentivizing them to be able to work with foreign governments to influence our democracy.
Foreign agent registry is something that keeps coming up in this conversation. Can you just explain quickly to people the value of that, how it would work, and what the material impact of something like that would be?
Yeah, so theoretically speaking, a foreign agent registry, once it's set up, would require people who are acting on behalf of the interests of a foreign principal, like a government, to tell the government of Canada that they are doing so that people can be informed about who they're dealing with. And secondly, it allows people to be penalized if they don't follow these rules. So we're assuming that not everyone's going to register, as has been in the case in the United States, and that if they don't do so and they conduct influence activities on behalf of a government like China or Russia, a government can penalize them for doing so.
So from your perspective on all of this, is Canada doing enough to counter this sort of foreign interference in elections? Because we're not getting a lot of answers, we get a lot of reassurances, but is it your sense that the country is seized enough with what's happening here?
I think we've reached a point in national conversation where we've expressed a collective concern about this issue, and I think things are moving in the right direction. The fact that the site task force exists is a sign that there is a concern about election interference. I think one of the challenges is we have to understand that election interference is not just specifically around an election cycle. These are multi-year kind of influence efforts, interference efforts that take span over multiple generations of time. And we need to be able to resource our intelligence services and police services to be able to investigate and prosecute those cases of interference appropriately, either through modernized legislation or through an agent registry or other measures as deemed appropriate for Canada.
There's monitoring it and then there's investigating it, but what does Canada need to do to counter it? Because if this is, maybe it's not affecting the top line election outcome, but every riding should be, free and fair from interference. So what does Canada need to do to counter this type of interference?
Well, the first step is shining a light on that it's happening and to educate people who are the targets of interference. This includes diaspora communities who are often, as Stephen mentioned, the victims of foreign interference, helping them understand who they can go to and having realistic options for them to complain about interference activities. It's also about educating our public officials at every level of government. And CSIS has mentioned this at multiple hearings, that it's not just at the federal level, it's also at provincial, municipal, and other stakeholder levels where people need to be aware of what interference looks like to be able to counter it. So education is a huge piece. I've also mentioned tools to be able to investigate and prosecute. That will definitely put a damper, in my opinion, on the activities from taking place. And also working with our partners, understanding what our allies are doing and working collectively on these issues, because it's not, as I mentioned, just a Canada issue.
But education requires some transparency. Do you think we're being transparent enough in exactly what is happening and what it looks like so that people and candidates and volunteers can spot it and see it and respond to it?
I think CSIS has taken some steps recently that are encouraging. There have been reports that they have been training MPs, meeting them, educating them on what foreign interference is. They've released a couple of public documents, which is a lot more than they've done previously. And I think this is an iterative process in the sense that we see where things are going, we improve upon them, and hopefully we end up with an end product where people are much better off. I think more can be done to raise awareness in amongst elected officials, but also it comes down to, as I mentioned, resourcing. CSIS it only has so many resources. It can only do so many briefings. It can only prepare so many people. There are a whole range of other threats and needs to investigate. So, it's going to probably investigate the highest risk harm issues first and brief the people who are most at risk of foreign interference attempts. But there is room for improvement. But I think things are moving in the right direction, especially by having this conversation.
Okay, Akshay, we always appreciate when you join us for a conversation. That is Akshay Singh with Ottawa University Centre for International Policy Studies. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.